After the 18th Amendment comes the 19th Amendment. So once we stopped drinking, we realized, yeah, women can vote. So we ratify the 19th Amendment in 1920, where we let women finally have the right to vote. And this stemmed from the suffrage movement, the suffragettes of the 1860s, like Seneca Falls and those types of things, with Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and Carrie Chapman Catt. Secco Vanzetti, we did that trial in class. It's one of my favorite trials just because it's so indicative of the Palmer raids and the paranoia that was existing in America at the time. It's the two gunmen who robbed a factory and killed two men in Massachusetts. Remember, it was the shoe factory. They actually robbed the armored car. They were Italian immigrants and anarchists who were tried for murder, found guilty, and given the death sentence, although a lot of people said that they were probably innocent. And this reflected the anti-immigrant sentiments in the U.S. Industrial changes in the 1920s and the effects of this. We went from steam to electric powered plants. The use of electric power is also going to get rid of some of the human labor. Scientific management due to Taylor's innovations, as well as the work of Henry Ford, implemented strategies where those who were employed were more efficient. Major research and development projects reduced production costs and products, and we also had more things that we were making. Remember, the 1920s, there's an emphasis on stuff. So it led to overproduction by the late 1920s, which is going to somewhat contribute to our Great Depression. The Harlem Renaissance was a movement that grew out of African American literature and arts. Remember, after the Great Migration, as African Americans moved north, they brought with them their culture, the mixture of their culture with the white culture present at the time creates this birth of jazz music and clubs that celebrated the jazz music. The center of this movement was Harlem, New York. That's where the movement gets its name. Writing, sculpting, photography, painting, all of that reflected this movement as well. Key writers from the period included Langston Hughes, Zora Neale Hurston, and Claude McKay. Musicians from this time period included Duke Ellington, Bessie Smith, and Louis Armstrong. That's my Louis impersonation. Just go with it. Car. 1920s was the birth of car culture. This is going to lead to other manufacturing things. Words are gone right now. Steel, rubber, glass, gas, highway construction, all those industries are going to take off because of the birth of the car industry. It created a nation of paved roads. There was a new need for paved roads that led to employment for many. It helped increase freedom for young people while lessening parental controls. And tourism also became popular and is going to spread, like electricity, for example, to places where there hadn't been a need for it before. And you also have more leisure time, and so people are going to go on like vacations. There is a general rise in the standard of living during the 20s because of advances like indoor plumbing, hot water, central heating, and then we talked about some of the appliances like the iron, the ice box, the toaster oven, and then fresher foods are going to emerge because of this. Though some people didn't have access to money, some people did, but in order to make everybody have access to it, the birth of credit was adopted by major businesses. Sales grew out of advertising through new media such as the radio. Marcus Garvey was a native of Jamaica. He advocated African-American racial pride and separatism rather than integration. It was the Back to Africa movement. He developed a following, and he got a bunch of people together and started taking them back to Africa. But he was convicted of fraud and eventually went bankrupt. Popular culture changes in the 1920s. You have like the flappers and everything. That's certainly important, where they changed their dress and they changed the music they were listening to, and it changed morals. You also had the change from entertainment through home and small social groups to commercial profit-making activities, the birth of Hollywood culture. Movies are going to attract audiences. Professional athletes become celebrities during this time period. You also have celebrity culture in terms of heroes like Lindbergh, and you also have tabloids in addition to things like the New York Daily Times and the Reader's Digest. KKK, boo! The KKK gained popularity once again, but this time they're going to broaden who they're after. So not just were they targeting African Americans, but now they were also opposed to Catholics, Jews, immigrants, any number of minorities. They hired advertising experts to expand the organization. They charged initiation fees, and they also sold memorabilia. By 1925, around 5 million people were in the KKK. The Emergency Quota Act was one of a series of acts by Congress that limited immigration by nationality to 3% of the number of foreign-born persons from that nation living in the U.S. in 1910. This is part of the America for Americans philosophy, but also because we wanted to favor Americans for work and job opportunities. The destination restricted only nationalities and religious groups, and targeted groups like Italians, Greeks, Poles, Germans, and other Eastern European Jews. The three presidents of the 20s were the three that I consider fairly uncharismatic. You had Harding, 29th president. He was a Republican. He, newspaper editor, promised a return to normalcy when he invented the word from Marion, Ohio. He represented opposition to the League of Nations, low taxes, high tariffs, immigration restriction, and aid to farmers. He was pro-civil rights. He pardoned Eugene V. Debs, who had ran for president from jail, and he gave U.S. steelworkers the 8-hour day. However, he died. Oh, and he also had an affair with a woman named Nan Britton and fathered an illegitimate child. But then he died, and he was replaced by Vice President Calvin Coolidge. Before he died, however, he had other scandals. The Teapot Dome scandal was probably his most famous. He was not, it's kind of like Grant. He wasn't directly involved, but his cabinet was pretty corrupt. And so in this case, it was the Secretary of the Interior, Albert Fall, who took oil reserves and in exchange kind of turned them around for cash payouts in Teapot Dome, Wyoming. The businessmen were acquitted of any wrongdoing. It's basically bribery, but Fall was imprisoned, and he was the first cabinet members to go to jail. The Forney-McCumber tariff increased tariff schedules. Basically, tariffs were raised on farm produce in an attempt to equalize American and foreign production. It gave the president the power to reduce or increase tariffs by 50% based on advice from the Tariff Commission, and it connected to Americans' feelings towards isolationism. The Five Power Treaty was committed, it basically joined the U.S., Britain, Japan, France, and Italy to building a bunch of new battleships together, and in exchange, Japan got supremacy of the Pacific, but we didn't want to give up our lands in the Pacific, and that's obviously going to be part of what triggers their hatred of us towards World War II, because they're like, wait, you said that you could have supremacy of the Pacific, and yet you're sitting here with Guam and the Philippines. The Dawes Plan was a debt restructuring plan for Germany after World War I, kind of like an early Marshall Plan, only bad, only because it didn't work. American banks made loans to Germany, and then Germany paid the reparations to the Allies that they owed, and then the Allies paid back the U.S. government. The cycles were based on loans from American banks. The plan would play a big part in the Great Depression because of the times that were associated with it, and basically the money that was being pushed around was all devalued at the time anyways. After Harding died, Coolidge becomes president. Silent Cal doesn't speak very much. Remember, I bet I can make you say 3 words. You lose. Son died playing tennis, got a blister. He was pretty clear. He stayed clear of most of the scandals during Harding's presidency. He is most known for being like very, very honest. He's a very honest guy, and he was economically driven, but very like hands-off, standoffish, laissez-faire. The chief American of the, he said, "The business of America is business." That's his famous quote. He basically looked at the country as a giant bank, and he was the CEO or the CFO. Creationism and the Scopes Monkey trial, that was the other trial that we did in class. That's the one where the substitute teacher got in trouble in Tennessee for teaching about evolution in school. And it was a very famous trial just because of kind of the show of it. You had William Jennings Bryan going against Clarence Darrow, who was another of the really big speakers / attorneys at the time. And it was almost more of like a celebrated Hollywood movie than a real legitimate trial. Scopes ultimately was convicted and fined $100, and even that was dropped later on. And some states were going to pass anti-evolution laws. The Kellogg-Briand Pact, lots of words, easiest way to think of it, it made war illegal. Just process that. War is now illegal. Okay, how do you enforce that? If somebody breaks the law, you gotta go to war. So you just broke the law. So it was ridiculous. Herbert Hoover is going to become president after Coolidge. he didn't go for nomination in 28, so Hoover basically ran. Hoover ran against a guy named Alfred Smith, who was governor of New York, a Catholic and anti-prohibitionist. Um, Hoover was fairly wealthy privately. He had a lot of influence in the mining industry, and as we had said before, he was head of the Food Administration. He was a fairly conservative economic philosopher in terms of his philosophy, and he also wanted prohibition, but then once like the Depression hits, he kind of backs off from that, although it doesn't. The 21st Amendment doesn't get ratified until later on. He used the phrase rugged individualism, which called for people to basically be kingdoms of their own domain. Like, you gotta stay tough, and he promised a chick in every pot, but most people said they didn't even have a pot. Times are tough, and he was not necessarily the right man for the job, although he did try, and I think we need to give him some more credit and slack than he tends to usually get. He's going to be replaced by FDR. The stock market crash of 1929, it was mostly caused by over-speculation. It's not the only thing that causes the Great Depression, but obviously it was instrumental. The Dow Jones is going to be what measures like stock values. It dropped significantly on both Black Thursday and then Black Tuesday, and as a result, there was huge panic and pandemonium, and we did that in class. We did that simulation in class. In terms of foreign economies in the Great Depression, within months of Hoover's election, the stock market crashed. The decline in the American economy meant less money spent on loans and products from other countries, which is going to help other countries continue their economic spiral, so the world basically goes into a massive economic chaos. The Reconstruction Finance Corporation was chartered by Congress and Hoover to loan money to railroads and financial institutions in an effort to keep basic institutions in business. But it was accused of helping only the very, very rich. Hoovervilles were the shanty towns that were created by those who had basically gone bankrupt or broke, and they named them obviously in honor of President Hoover, and they are in the musical Annie. The Halley-Smoot tariff brought tariff levels to the highest level in U.S. history. In retaliation, foreign countries set tariffs on American goods, creating a decline in exports and further deepening the economic depression, and it was another expression of our isolationism. The Hoover-Stimson Doctrine. Henry Stimson was the Secretary of State under Hoover. He is going to send letters to both China and Japan that eventually become this doctrine, and they both were basically us saying we weren't happy with what was going on in Japan. Japan was going into a part of China called Manchuria, and it threatened some of our business interests. And we said that we wouldn't recognize any treaty or agreement that would limit China's territory, encroach on U.S. rights in China, or upset the political situation in China, or go against the open door policy. So basically it was us saying, Japan, knock it off. And Japan saying, deal with it, America. We don't care. This is important because about 10 years later, Pearl Harbor. The Bonus Army was a group of people who had been veterans in World War I, and there were about 14,000 of them, who, when they went broke during the Depression, decided to go to Congress to petition them for early payment of the bonuses that had been promised to them. They actually wanted not only early, but they wanted additional payments. Hoover had said that the Senate would not pay them because of the government's offer of transportation back to the troops and back home instead. We're basically like, we'll pay for you to go home, but we're not giving you any other money. We don't have it. They refused, the Bonus Army refused, and basically set up a Hooverville, if you will, right there in the middle of DC. So Hoover is going to call in the regular army to go and remove them from Washington, DC. So now you have the army fighting the army, which, if you remember in our Hip Hughes video, he went nuts about the army's fighting the army. Oh, the army's fighting the army! Yeah, that's what was going on, and it was bad. And it made Hoover look really insensitive. To make matters worse, we had the Dust Bowl. This is when there was a huge drought in the Great Plains. In addition to the fact that we had been farming poorly, and so as a result, much of the soil turned to dust and blew across the nation, and lots of people lost their farms, and they had to move west in the effort to look for jobs. And we have the Okies, who moved to Oklahoma, and then moved out to California, and we have the Grapes of Wrath, which is the famous book about this, and things were just bad.